Hello, Tip, everyone. Tristan. So welcome to. Yep. Oh, who we missing? We have Brother Tristan here, Brother Zach. Well, welcome to our panel discussion. The Vindication of Malcolm X. And again, this is always a pleasure to have you on our platform. This week is Afrocentricity International Week for the chapter of Philadelphia. And during this week, we're going to propose a series of events to kind of showcase our organization, the Afrocentric thoughts. And today we have like a panel of 5 brilliant young African Afrocentrists who will discuss Malcolm X legacy as today is his actual birthday, May 19. Usually we go to the Ferncliff Cemetery to Professor Baba Small pilgrimage that he organized, but unfortunately with the COVID, we avoid gatherings. But I'm going to let the two hosts, Brother Zach and Brother Tristan, take the lead from here and introduce themselves and introduce the rest of the panel. Tristan.
All right. Hold up, everybody. I'm Tristan. I'm the General Secretary for AI Philly, and I'll be co-moderating with my colleague here, Zach Brooks, this discussion on One Night in Miami.
Hey, what's going on, y'all? You hear me?
I hear you.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. My name is Zach Brooks. Been part of AI for about 3 years now. So, yeah. What's that? You can hear me, Tristan? You muted?
I hear you.
Okay. Yeah. So, So we're just here to introduce the conversation. What is it? Vindication of Malcolm X. Came up very recently because with these period pieces, it's always a reflection of the times, when we watch these kind of historical events. So I think it's important for us to engage when they depict some of our significant ancestors, such as, Omowale Malcolm X, Nana Omowale Malcolm X, right? So, Tristan, so where'd you like to start? One Night in Miami, where do you want to start?
I keep forgetting I'm on mute. I think what's good to start off with, when does One Night in Miami take place?
I think within the movie, it takes place around like 1960. I mean, you probably look that up.
I think it's 64. The film takes place in 64.
64, yeah.
So around this time, and I think it's important just to contextualize the film, this is somewhat before Malcolm X. This is somewhat before Malcolm X breaks away from the Nation of Islam. So it's around that time. And just as Muhammad Ali, then Cassius Clay, was transitioning to become Muhammad Ali and join the NOI at this time. So that's really the setting of the film. So you're looking at really right in the midst of, you might say, Malcolm's prime in terms of.
Well, I mean, I think it's important too to shout out that like today is like Malcolm X Day, so I think it's important for us to kind of take the time to really show honor and appreciation and reverence for some of the champions who fought for our people. So I think we should take that and acknowledge that before we get into the movie, because I think the movie is just really one depiction of many. And I want to talk about some of the other depictions and how they relate as well. So, yeah.
So with that, Zach, what you have in mind, because we can go a lot of different directions. We also have our own Omowale on here.
Yeah, shout out to Brother Omowale, right? What's up? What's up, y'all?
Peace.
Jump in.
Peace. No, I mean, I felt like you were about to go in a direction with your questions, and you wanted just context in terms of, or Tristan was asking for context in terms of the when the movie was set. All right, I'm hearing playback. Is that from me or is that from one of y'all?
I think
I
it
don't
was.
know.
It's
Sorry, I was muted. No, but I mean, go ahead, Tristan. What's your question, man?
Well, I do have two questions to get us started that I think, in terms of the film, and I know we'll get into sorry, the cat. Okay, all right, yeah. Remember, also dogs are better than cats. I just want to say that. But anyways, that's sidebar. But the two questions I had: what do we think of Malcolm X? And what makes Malcolm X an ancestor? They're two very interrelated questions, but I think that's very important that we each discuss that before we get into the film.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's important. I mean, me and you had a discussion a bit earlier about the value of people actually studying the historical narratives of people's lives and not just speeches and rhetoric, because people they don't know how to measure our ancestors by their accomplishments. You know, they don't know how to measure people by what they've achieved for our people, but rather they like to cherry pick the people based on, ideological comments that they've made, So I think Malcolm X is a champion of our people because he organized so many of us in so many different places, and he unified so many people so broadly. I mean, and that's not speaking of the United States, that's speaking of the world. That's speaking, Africa. So I mean, how many I mean, I'm sure those of us who are well studied on our history can name many others who have done such things for African people. But at the same time, we know personalities like Malcolm X are few and far between. So, I mean, that's what makes Malcolm X stand out as one of our champions and one of our most prolific ancestors.
So Tristan, to answer your question, was the first part of your question was why do we honor Malcolm X?
What do we think of him and what? Oh, sorry.
Yeah, so I think that the reason why we honor Malcolm X is because he loved Black people so deeply, and I think that he showed that in his life through his commitment to us. His willingness to sacrifice. He sacrificed so much. You know what I mean? His family. He could have had a very long life, but instead he chose to use his example and use his time here to push the fight forward for freedom for our community. And I think that he gave up a lot in order to do that. So whenever someone lives a life of struggle, whenever somebody lives a life that is just one that is indicative of just commitment and sacrifice and work on behalf of your people, I think that they are deserving of the honor that Malcolm receives. Like even in the face of extreme odds, you know what I mean? He was still just courageous and willing to continue to move forward no matter what things look like. And I think that Malcolm's example inspired not just his generation, but generations to follow. So I think that, what makes him an ancestor is the life that he lived while he was here, the character that he showed us through his example, his courageousness, his victorious spirit, his electrifying voice, like all of the above. So we don't just call him an ancestor. It's something that he did. Yo, stop calling me. Like I'm doing something right now. I'm like we don't just call him an ancestor. Like it's something that he's earned and he deserves.
Yeah, I agree. For me, when I think about Nana Malcolm X, I just think he is just the epitome of fearlessness. You know what I'm saying? To the point that was made at the top, he spoke to any and everybody, but every single time he was consistent about what
Is it just me, or
I
did we
think
lose Sister Lydia?
I think we lost LB.
Yeah, and somebody just texted me. Are we live on YouTube?
Yes,
All
we
right,
are.
cool.
And that's going to be the AI. They can type AI Philly channel, and they can find us there.
Oh yeah, we straight.
Yeah. So, oh, LB is not. Where is LB? Oh, all right. Well, LB tried to come back to us. Um, yeah.
Well,
Yeah. So we apologize. A lot of technical difficulties. Yeah. Sorry. But LB will be back and she will answer a question. So the question was why we honor Malcolm X. I can share my perspective from coming from the continent, um, and being here. Uh, I I primarily think it's so important to to celebrate Malcolm X because his message really was inclusive to the entire African world very early. So I see him as somebody that was very ahead of his time. He was able uh, to connect both what's going on here in America with what's going on everywhere else in the African world. And this is something I think that we don't find. I mean, we find like we don't find that many leaders who were speaking about it during this time. So that's one thing I think that make him so honorable and a person to really read and listen. Is really a testament of people of being ahead of the time, and that I can definitely appreciate. That it's hard to speak about African experience, African story without mentioning or like studying the ideas of Malcolm X. And I think this is something that's really important and something that make him like someone that you have to listen. There's a few leader that you can say, okay, I'm not gonna read what he says, or like if you read it, it's like a plus. But I feel like Malcolm X is more like a point where like you have to go through in order to understand the African world experience. You know what I mean? So that's my little answer here.
I think what often gets left out, because coming up to this conversation, just today I just kind of reviewed over a couple different, like books about Malcolm X, speeches. I watched a documentary that was the Smithsonian put together. And one of the aspects of Malcolm X that often gets left out is now in schools they call it Black internationalism because that's like a euphemism for Pan-Africanism, get your PhD. But like basically like the thing is, instead of dealing with the international dimensions of Malcolm X, because America is an international empire. Like they're a superpower in that they named themselves a superpower during the Cold War so that they had an excuse and a logic justification to go intrude in everybody else's business around the world. And Malcolm X became an issue for not only the domestic issue of the Black population here in the United States, but also for America's imperial values in Africa and other places in the world. So, so his presence in so many different places is very relevant. I mean, that's why he, was worried about the CIA following him all over around the world, because sometimes our people don't see the value in our champions, but our enemies do. So I think that's like an important thing to bring up. So, but yeah.
All right, that's cool. Sorry, I have a trait in my background, so sometimes I pause. But for me, what I value sort of kind of is in line with what, everybody on the panel has said. But for me, two things that are very important to me was and I think it's related to what was said earlier, discipline and commitment, unapologetic and discipline, because I think that's something we tend to look down on sometimes when it comes to community conscious. Why do we have to be so serious? And that foolishness. That's what made Malcolm X appealing to me, is that he's very, I tend to like people like that, who are very, this is what it is, this is what I'm going to do, and they're unapologetic. I tend to lean to that. And within that, though, it's not like he's dogmatic, but then this goes to my second point, the importance of looking at things that affect our people systematically. That systematic way of looking at things, I think, is something that I definitely made him very influential for me. He's one of our thinkers that really point out why we have to look at the things that happen to us in a systematic way. Just to go with his famous quote, don't let your enemy educate your children. I know I kind of butchered it, but things like that, and how he analyzes the difference between liberals and conservatives, but the fundamental sameness. I think that type of thinking is very, very important, and the way you delivered that. So that systematic aspect to me is very important.
And to that point, I think people get caught up with the systematic talk. I mean, it reminded me of something Khalid Muhammad says, where he talks about, like, people get caught up knocking down spider webs, but never want to focus on the spider, right? So he's like, people want to talk about isms, but they don't want to talk about the people who are the proponents of these ideologies, because those people are the actors in history. But people get so caught up, they want to talk about capitalism and this ism and that ism, but they don't want to talk about the people who produce the idea. Because many ideas are ideas don't fall from the sky, as Parat Amamazama reminds us. Like she says, they don't fall from the sky. So people need to study history. And so when you look at the history of the idea and the proponent of the idea and how it got to our people, then you start to realize Malcolm X, like, one of the things that I've found very attractive about Malcolm X is that while he was a theologian and he dealt with religion and all of those things, he was dedicated to our people. So because he was dedicated to our people, he was led towards our people, like, as to where maybe Farrakhan or maybe some of the other Islamists, they focus more on the Arab world and that white world, that aspect of the white world, so I don't think Malcolm X was so much an ideologue, so much as he was dedicated to our people. He was dedicated to the consistent study of our people. And that's why his analysis and his understanding constantly grew as he came into contact with, different groups of African people in different places where their situation may be similar, but, but it has whatever its particularities are, So, like, I mean, and to me, that mirrors the story, that mirrors Marcus Garvey's life, knowing, his father was a Garveyite and his mother was a Garveyite, So, those are the kinds of analogs that I kind of see in history when I look at personalities like Malcolm X or, Marcus Garvey. I mean, they all have these transformational lives, based on where they travel and who they go and meet and who they see, and, and it shapes their ideas. But I mean, last point, I think that's why significant contact with white people is important when we deal with people's ideas, so, and Malcolm X being a separatist, I think that was why he was so steadfast to Black people and never got swept away in fighting in between white causes, But yeah.
All right, so that wraps up. Anyone else have anything to add before we get to the next segment? No, you good, Omar? You good, Shanudi?
Yeah, I'm good. I don't have anything to add.
I did want to ask, so if we had to, before we get into the movie or get into the film, because I think we got a bit of context, what if you could sum up your view of the movie in a very concise, like less than 30 seconds way, how would you explain your view of the movie? Does that my question make sense, or should I restate it?
Yeah, my review, I would call the movie dangerous. If I was to give a one word review, dangerous in the sense that if you have not read Malcolm, if you have not familiarized yourself with his thinking, um, his character, uh, his analysis, then being introduced to Malcolm through that vehicle will introduce you to some figment of Hollywood's imagination that is not at all representative of Malcolm X.
Oh, Shanuti?
Yes. Well, yeah. It's. I watched the movie only once. I didn't watch it several times. The movie, but I just saw what I felt. I can tell you what I felt. I felt like a Malcolm that was very vulnerable, who was paranoid, who was like very agitated when I watched the movie, and it's not like the it kind of if you don't know who Malcolm X was or if you haven't studied him, I feel like you might have a it might give you a different opinion of who Malcolm X was, just the way he carried himself. So I feel like I mean, if we just only talk about the movie, I feel like they were trying to. There were some good dialogues. There were some good things that have been said, but I feel like they're trying to still make him pleasing to. They just try to to get the Malcolm X that will please kind of everybody. You know what I mean? They're trying to also sometimes reduce the impact of what he has done or what he has accomplished, but like in a more subtle way. So I don't know. Like I would think that the movie is okay. It's better than some movie that we have before, but I think that it could have been done better because Malcolm was somebody that was authentic. He was fearless. He would tell things how it was. And I don't know him personally, so I don't know what really happened in this room or if it really happened in that way. But I have a feeling that there were certainly a little bit, a lot of what's the word? Kind of they. I don't. I want to say like a little bit something to. I want to say fictive moment, something that wasn't real. You know, it wasn't so much like the Malcolm X that we see. Uh, the impact of energy that he has on people, the influence he had on people. They tried to make him like somebody really weak. I was that's the feeling I had when I watched the movie. But you know, it can serve some purpose for some people, but I don't think it cut it well for me.
Oh, Zach?
Yeah. Well, I mean, yeah. I just finished watching it again a couple, maybe like a half hour ago. I think the movie is like a explainer to white liberals why Malcolm X is a good person. I felt like I felt like that's what the movie was. But um, I felt like if you know nothing, like if you have never read anything about Malcolm X, which I know many people have not, whether they profess to or not. I think it's introductory material, and I think everybody should have a critical eye of anything, especially as it relates to revolutionary personalities. We always know that our enemies are not going to portray our heroes in the light that they deserve because they stood against our enemies. You see, so they're not going to depict him accurately. But I feel like within the past 50 years, I feel like the United States is trying to go on this cycle again with integrationism and this love affair with the 1960s and the Civil Rights Act, with, you know, so I felt like that's what the movie kind of was. It's like how do we get militant black people into the good graces of white radicals and liberals? I mean, so yeah, but the movie was still straight, like you know, like it's just as I recognize, you know, Jim Brown, Muhammad Ali, and Sam Cooke, you know, like they all like ended up being like Republicans later in their life, you know, because of their liberal politics when they were young. So I mean, I don't want to say liberal because Muhammad Ali wasn't in that crowd, but you know, that's why I say about like narratives, because it's like ideology and people's lives are two related things, but they're distinct too. So, but yeah, I'm rambling a bit, but that's what I thought of the movie.
Yeah, and you know, I also want to add this is like you can tell like the movie also really came out during the I mean like it's kind of like a post like during like the George Floyd Black Lives Matter little movement that they had in 2020, right? Or when did it even come? It came like in 21, right? 21 or early 21 or like late 2020. I don't remember, but you can tell like it's again like I feel like historically we know that whenever like there's like some type of movement on the streets, right, happening in America, they will instead of like they will try to take that energy, right, and push it into the movies. You know what I mean? So like they're gonna create like some type of militancy in the movie, so people feel like well like the general opinion is on our side. So like it's kind of a movie that comes as a way of how to say that it's a movie that comes to displace kind of the people from the streets to the household watching this movie and like say that yeah like people not see what we're seeing, people understand black people, even Malcolm X, you know what I mean, like even like now like the white people and the liberal like they can see that oh this is Malcolm X how it was, and you know I don't know if you see a little bit what I'm trying to say is something that historically we have seen like when they don't want black people to be on the streets, they try to put it on a movie and make you feel good about it. Like, yeah, they're down with Malcolm X. They're down with what with Muhammad Ali and so forth. So I think that the timing is very important when they come out with the movie because it coincides with like the Black Lives Matter, the militancy that they saw on the street, people kind of going on the street. So for me, it's a connection that I can make with the movie. I just thought about adding that.
Well, for me, my quick review of the film is that in terms as it pertains to Malcolm X, because that's what my focus was when I was watching it, because anytime I watch any of these films I that deal with that period and Malcolm X is in it, I just by default. So my quick review is that it's basically, and this kind of adds on to Shanuti's point, it's a reformist black person's resistance to black nationalism. And I think or put another way, it's what integrationist and or assimilationist black people fear or why they resist black nationalism in any capacity. I think that's what the film is a representation of. In that's how I would leave it in a quick, synopsis. But I did want to ask Brother Omawale a quick question, because I said reformist. What's the term you use? There's militant integrationist. Is it militant integrationist? And then there's the soft. I just couldn't remember that distinction. I've heard you use it.
Yeah, it might have been either militant integrationist or radical integrationist.
Yeah. So you're seeing sort of more of the reformist integrationist and assimilationist perspectives, not the militant integrationist, but more of the reform type. I just wanted to clarify that. But that's how I saw the film. It's that type of black perspective on Malcolm X.
I actually, I'm just thinking about the movie, and I'm thinking about how like Jim Brown, he's like I love my grandmama's pork chops and I love white women. Like I'm not giving up white women. And he says it almost like a joke. And it's funny to me because there are so many people like that. I just thought that was like a very accurate thing where it's like, yeah, I can't give up the white man's prize for my people, you know, like, I don't know, but the thing is, I felt like the same thing with Sam Cooke, but like a lot of these guys, to me, what they embodied people that I know of, that I can kind of see around, you know, like my family and, you know, friends. And I mean, not just, you know, in general, you know, people with very conservative politics, you know, like black people with those very pull yourself up by your bootstrap politics, right? I mean, just to say what it is, you know, like to me, that just seems like the Protestant work ethic. And I just see it as a part of American nationalism and a part of manifest destiny, like straight like that. And Malcolm X got out of that stuff by studying his own history. And many of the other people did not, or don't understand the ways that they embody those values. And that's what I saw in the movie. I saw those guys in their response to Malcolm X, because those guys became conservatives way later in their lives. And that's what people who are very religious tend to do. They tend to assimilate further into the orthodoxy of the religion, and which gives them conservative politics normally. So I don't know. That's what I was seeing in the movie. Maybe my perspective is a bit you know, but yeah, that's what I witnessed.
Anybody got anything to add?
Nope.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just add that I feel like the Malcolm who was portrayed in that particular project was a Malcolm who was meant to be made small in stature. Like they really tried to like problematize his character and show you kind of like the weaknesses in his personality. And I would be okay with that if they were any way true and just weren't basically Hollywood creations based on a true story. Like the Malcolm that you got in there was somebody who was painted as a religious zealot, who was isolated, who was somewhat out of touch from his peers who he was, looking to reach, whereas though they could almost like paint him as like unreasonable. And, he wasn't understanding of, the issues that the everyday common black man was facing, which was representative and kind of like represented like the lives of his peers, like Sam Cooke and them, you know what I mean? Like Sam Cooke being an excellent, businessman. And then they tried to, make it seem like, he was like using like Muhammad Ali. And that's another thing they when you look at, what's this dude named Skip Gates, the documentary that he did on Malcolm, they try to do that as well, by trying to make it seem like he was using Muhammad Ali as a pawn, and in this game that he was playing to try to get back into the good graces of Elijah Muhammad. So like, in my opinion, I really was left with like a nasty taste in my mouth with the type of Malcolm that they tried to create, because it was so far from the truth of who he was and his character and his action. And I think that it also betrayed his politic. I think that one of the reasons why, he's thrown out of the Nation of Islam with some of the challenges that he had is because I'm over here with the kids, y'all. So like, it's like, what do you want, Mama? All right, I give you whatever you want. I think one of the reasons why he's thrown out of the Nation of Islam is because his politics stretch beyond just religion. You know what I mean? Like he's dealing with real world issues, and I think that is creating conflict between him and the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. But like none of that, again, is covered in the film. The film really just portrays him as like some religious zealot who's like out of touch, almost diminished in character and weak. So yeah, I didn't like that at all.
One of the things you said, I noticed it because it's something Martin Luther King said about Elijah Muhammad in the letter to Birmingham jail about black nationalists being apathetic and not wanting to do real work. And Bayard Rustin, actually Martin Luther King's political strategist, also actually made the same comment about Malcolm X when they debated. And I found that profound because the way Elijah Muhammad really understood politics is he understood that to be here in the United States to be white people's domain, because that is it, because the United States is a white nation. And Malcolm X participating in the political struggles inside of that apparatus, the American political system, would stir up white people and make them want to attack the Nation of Islam. And I actually think that, like, I had a point. Basically the point that I was going to make is that, like, oftentimes people think that if you don't have integrationist politics, or if you're not working with the patriots, right, or the white people who embody the core of the nation, if you're not working with them, then you're not doing anything. Like, I think people think that when it comes to political activity, and I don't think people, because that's what laws are, who passes laws and where are they passed. And I don't think people think about, when they talk about systems, that's why I say I think people think very abstractly about systems, but they don't think about systems being comprised as people. And I think that's why people can get away with some of this, like, whether they leftist or whatever, they can get away with some of the things they say because they be so abstract that you don't realize they're talking about white people and working with white people. And Malcolm X was very clear on not working with white people, regardless of what his religion became. So you have different people who fall on different spectrums or different proximities as we look through our history, where they fall in relationship to that core group. But you don't see people like Malcolm X unless you start looking to, like, like you said, the more Pan-Africanist nationalists, grassroots, those kind of people, ultimately further back the Maroons, those kind of, you know what I mean? But everybody normally thinks about people who have that trajectory to work inside of the white nation as people who are very active and very valuable. But people who don't work with white people, they see them as do-nothingers. And that's what Bayard Rustin and Martin Luther King and many of the NAACP people, that's how they thought of Black nationalists at that time. They thought of, oh, you're not participating in the system, you're not voting. Well, that means you're a traitor to your people, because whatever. So I think there's something there where people get kind of caught up. I think it's by religion. I really do. I really do think, because who else gives you rights if not God? And who is the God if not the people? So I don't think everybody was always clear on that, but, and including Malcolm X himself at different points. But I think that's sometimes the issue. But yeah.
Yeah, I think that point's very important. What you said about oh, sorry, we're getting caught up. I think that point, though, because it's funny with Birmingham jail, because it's always, and this is why I think it's always important to understand that, unfortunately, I say unfortunately because this should not be the case, but we know with the white validation syndrome, this diversity comes up in terms of our political thinking. I think it's important to highlight the people who disagreed with him and why they did, the political context of why they did. Because I think, wasn't MLK, when he wrote the letter in Birmingham jail, I think he was part of the Big Six, if I'm not mistaken. And this is not to bash Martin Luther King, but I think that's very important when you read the letter to Birmingham jail, because usually when I see it on social media, you know how it goes. You usually only see his critique of the white moderate, and that's yeah. But when you look at how he views Black nationalism, you're like, or the Black Muslims, as he worded it, you're like, wow. Because I remember I had someone read the letter to Birmingham jail, and they said if I only knew that aspect of MLK, we might have called him, a coon today. Not to disrespect, but just that letter to Birmingham jail. But I think those things are important, right?
Yeah.
And I know Martin Luther King matures politically, even though he never becomes a nationalist, but he matures politically. But I think those things are important, and I think he was in the Big Six at the time of writing that letter. And it gets to how Malcolm thinks systematically, that aspect when he's making that critique, because one of the things that happens when we do make critiques of, Black bourgeois people, whether it be in the continent or in Black countries in the Caribbean, we don't look at the white forces behind them. Like, they don't exist without white forces. And Malcolm is very clear about that. We tend to want to avoid that question. And again, it's the spider web mist politics, as opposed to just going at the spider. And Malcolm is very perceptive of that, because in every interview that I've watched of him, if there's one, I think I've watched a good number, but if I've missed any and what I've read, he always makes sure to establish that connection, right?
Yes.
Funded by white people. This leader in the continent is funded by, America, China, Russia. He always makes those connections, and he makes it very clear the racial dynamic, right? I think that's very important.
Yeah, it's like there is no, like, that's what I mean. Like, his critique of Martin Luther King, beyond calling him Uncle Tom, which most people, that's the only thing they hear, is he's like, I get up here and I can say whatever I want because I'm funded by you. You fund me, my community, Black people. You fund what we do by patronizing our businesses, the Nation of Islam, by doing different things. You guys sponsor me. That's why I could get up here and I can tell you the things that I see from my point of view, and that be the truth, and it'd be different from the media, right? He was like, well, Martin Luther King and them, he was like, they're fighting over money. Like, a lot of them are waiting on money from white liberals to pay to give them money to facilitate their organizational programs. And that's why they can't say certain things that they know are true. They can't say these things because they're dependent on funds from white liberals that control their ideology. So, I mean, that's what I mean. I always think of money and ideas as related to each other. I mean, you got to look, and I learned that from Malcolm X.
I want to build on that point, but I would also point to, because there's the money factor, but also the socialization factor.
Mm-hmm.
Having very emotional attachments to white people. I think that's another one, because Malcolm, see, in today's politics, you can't touch that. But back then, up until 1990s, you couldn't touch in the public discourse the Black rinsing relationships issue, or so-called interracial relationships. You couldn't touch that. And the reason why I bring that up is because, some of these figures, like James Farmer, for example, victim of bedroom colonialism. And then also you have to look at, some of them had white friends, right?
Yeah.
In early stages of their childhood. And, just from the context that I navigate, I understand the impact that an emotional attachment up to white people has on how Black people think about things, especially in terms of racism, white supremacy. That can be lots of confusion inducing things going on there. I think that's very important.
Yeah, and like, when people think about, like, African resistance, I don't think they think about they don't think about what preceded the civil rights movement, right? Like, the clearest example I could think of is Dr. John Clark talking about South Africa, right? He says the Zulus fought the Boers for 200 years before the Boers were ever able to establish an apartheid system for people to want to integrate into, for the ANC and Nelson Mandela and them to want to integrate into. So when you're talking about people wanting to integrate, I mean, during antebellum enslavement, you had people who had the same politics as they do today, the whole spectrum. But people don't think about those things in that way because they don't study the history in that way. They study it more, or they don't even study it. What they do is they hear a catchy quote about house Negroes and field Negroes, and they project how they feel based on that quote. It's like, well, you should actually look at, like, how and what the relationship was between these different demographics or these different groups of people and how they played against each other. Because in the United States, you're coming out of Jim Crow segregation at that point. And, people don't understand, like, how Black people were socialized when they only had to live in their own segregated Black communities around each other, versus how some of these other people, like think about how Martin Luther King was coming up, just as think about where he grew up in Atlanta, and think about like he was in college by the time he was like 16. He was at Morehouse. Now think about the way like Malcolm X grew up, and think about where he lived in Detroit and Harlem and those kinds of things, and how that shapes his relationship to the white power structure and to his own people. He's not just standing up on some podium and preaching about loving your enemies. He's talking about what's practical and what's necessary to protect yourself amongst these kind of people, you see? And that's the kind of rhetoric that, that's where he gets that Fox rhetoric. He's like, yeah, they're calling me violent for saying we need to protect ourselves because they're a wolf and they don't want you to defend yourself as they eat you. That's Malcolm X's tone, but Martin Luther King's tone is not that, because of his relationship to the people, to his benefactors, should I say, right?
Hey Tristan, is there a way that we can like refocus kind of like the dialogue? Because I think that the title, I know we only have a limited amount of time, and I think that the title that y'all came up with is one that's very important, with the vindication of Malcolm X, because I do think that speaks to the reality that a distortion of Malcolm X is occurring. And I think the further, we get away from, his physical presence on this earth, the more distorted he becomes, for his progeny. So I think that both the One Night in Miami and the Netflix documentary were great examples of, why there needs to be a vindication of Malcolm X. But I feel like with this being Malcolm X Day, it'll be good for us to have a really focused and pointed conversation around why he needs to be vindicated and examples of the distortions that we are referring to, instead of a more broad dialogue around Malcolm and kind of like comparatives, because I just don't want to lose the significance of this day, Malcolm X Day, and the importance of this conversation that we're trying to have. So.
Oh no, you're right on cue, because I was just waiting after Zach finished up, because one of the questions that I did have, so we can connect it to the movie and get kind of back into it, what were aspects in terms of that vindication issue of the film? If you could pick, each of us could pick 2 examples specifically in the film that speak to distortion. 2 examples, they can be conceptual or direct, but 2 examples.
So of the 2 projects, the One Night in Miami and the Netflix documentary, I've watched both, but I saw the Netflix documentary more recently, and I think that if I refer to the Netflix documentary, one of the elements of distortion goes to who they chose as the subject matter experts on the topic, right? First and foremost, it was executive produced by Skip Gates. We know that Skip Gates does not like Black nationalism, most likely does not like Malcolm X's politics. So the fact that he's executive producing it is already a red flag. But then when you look at the different people that they have speaking during the documentary, I mean, you have, I believe they had Al Sharpton, they have Peniel Joseph, the guy who edited Manning Marable's book about where they make the claim that Malcolm was a homosexual. They have David Garrows, who puts out the book about Martin Luther King, essentially saying that Martin Luther King was like a Harvey Weinstein type character. So the type of people who they even chose to tell the story speaks to. Here, Mama, take which one you want. I'm pardon me, y'all. I'm over here babysitting and trying to do this at the same time. I mean, not babysitting because it's my daughter, but I'm otherwise occupied. But I think that was a significant distortion in the documentary, and then in the One Night in Miami project. I mean, again, it was a figment of their imagination. Like nothing about the project, in my opinion, was meant to be factual, other than the fact that all these gentlemen were in Miami together in history. You know, like that night in history, yes, that did occur. But in terms of them, like, you know, all being in a hotel room together and the dialogue and their character, like all of that was just made up. You understand what I'm saying? Like the whole, like, it was a bit too much for me. So I want people to understand that, because if you're watching that movie and you're like looking at it like, oh wow, you know, this is what Malcolm X was like. It's like, no, like this. I don't know who this guy is on the screen. You know what I mean? He has the name Malcolm X because it's based on a true story, but this, like, yeah, this is nothing like Malcolm X at all. So it's unfortunate, because a lot of our young people will watch that and then they'll have dialogue, you know, about him. You know what I mean? Based on this false narrative that's been created. No, you eat it, Mama. I don't want it. You eat it.
Thank you, brother Omawale. Shanuti.
Yeah, I mean, there's a particular dialogue when Malcolm X spoke in a movie, when he was speaking with Jim Brown, right? That's the football player name.
Yep, Jim Brown.
And like he mentioned something about financial economic freedom, right? And like he was trying to teach Malcolm about economic freedom. For me, it was kind of like. For me, it was like a little bit. It sounds like it sounds a little bit stupid, maybe from a lack of word. Because when you look at the Nation of Islam, they were kind of the portrayal of like what an organization that runs business is. You know what I mean? Like for me, it was kind of silly to think that Jim Brown. Or even I think there's also the dialogue that he had with what's his name, the singer,
Sam Cooke.
Sam Cooke, where he tells him he tried to teach Malcolm X about ownership and the music industry and all those things. Like when we look historically of many of the organization that knows about what is financial, what is economic, what is to be running businesses and running a community, I think it's hard not to speak about Nation of Islam. You know what I mean? And I don't think that Malcolm was a fool about it. So the way they run the dialogue about this specific topic, when they speak about financial freedom and all that, it's the same getaway that they're selling today. You know what I mean? That's why you can tell like it's fictional, like, because everybody thinks that, oh, yeah, like I'm just gonna, you know, I need financial freedom. I need to know more about money. I need to invest in stock. I need to run my own business. That's kind of like the new talk today. And you can tell like he was inserted in the movie kind of to make Malcolm sense like, you know, brother, like you don't need to do all that talking, because, you know, what we need is like to provide people like economic freedom, sell that economic issue. You know, the reason why where we are is because we don't know much. We don't know about business. We don't know what the economical free is. You know what I mean? And Jim Brown going to say even to Malcolm like, brother, you don't have a job. Like I was like, I laughed to that part, right?
Exactly.
When he said, "Oh, Malcolm, you don't have a job," I was like, "Wow, like this is very stupid." You know, I mean, like, how can you say that? But you know, yeah. Sorry, go ahead, Umwali.
No, the whole dialogue was like really meant to diminish him and attack his character. Like it was, you know, we've heard Malcolm. Now let's hear it from the integrationist perspective. Let's give you the integrationist view of Malcolm and why he wasn't a hero.
Well, you know, I do, and I think it was an integrationist perspective because it was a white perspective on Malcolm X. Like you said, David Garrow, and also you said Skip Gates, the executive producer, which basically means he bankrolled the film. They've probably drawn on Manning Marable's.
That's the documentary. David Garrow was a subject matter expert in the documentary. And
Well, he's a historian. He's a historian. So what I'm saying is Manning Marable, David Garrow, and a lot of these other white historians. Not Manning Marable is not white, but what I'm trying to say is What I'm trying to say is they're studying the FBI's documentation on Malcolm X, and so it's their perspective. That's what I'm trying to say. Is white people's perspective on Malcolm X, because it's how do we explain why Malcolm X is a good guy to white people now that he's becoming a part of the historical record and all this, because I mean that's why I said it's in the Smithsonian now. It's like you can't get around him.
Yeah, it's this whole notion that Malcolm was a misguided religious zealot, but towards the end of his life, he got rid of the problematic religion, and he started, to see that he, needed to work with white people and everybody else. Like after Mecca, he became a different person. He became a more mature integrationist.
Yeah, exactly. And the Smithsonian people actually said that. And this goes to your conversation, Omawale, about religion, because they literally said after Malcolm X left the Nation of Islam, after he was killed and Elijah Muhammad died, then the Nation of Islam followed in they said they followed in Malcolm's path and took Sunni Islam, which was more accepting, and changed their ideas of white people. Like that's basically what was in the Smithsonian document. And I just thought, I'm like, yeah, it's like, yo, they're not gonna talk about like I said, the actors of well, what I'm saying is the people that are like where is Malcolm X's relationship to other significant personalities? All, because you don't see him in those Pan-Africanist circles when they're depicting him. You see that's what I'm trying to get to. They're gonna sit him around people where their ideology can stand as propaganda in the movie, but they're not gonna situate him in a room full of people like Dr. John Howard Clark or with Maxwell Stanford from RAM, right? They're not gonna put him in the room with those kind of people in a movie,
Then there's a part in the movie where he's talking to Sister Betty Shabazz on the phone, and he's like, I talked to Brother Lewis, and basically, what the film is trying to say is that he was having a conversation with Louis Farrakhan, trying to get him to leave the Nation of Islam with him. And I'm like, come on, like with this like silliness, like Malcolm has said over and over and over again, like he was not looking to do any recruitment from within the ranks of the Nation of Islam. He was not looking to take members of the Nation of Islam to form his organization. But that whole one night in Miami tried to make it look like, hey man, if I could get Muhammad Ali as one of the first members of my new organization, then you know what I mean, I could really get my thing off the ground. And I'm like, yo, this thing couldn't be farther from the truth. You know what I mean? And it's unfortunate, but again, that's the depiction that they gave you of Malcolm.
It's the same thing that they were. I think the same narrative that they were putting on the documentary, that Malcolm was very looking for to please Elijah Muhammad, that he has to go and recruit all those celebrities for him, so like he can have the favor. I mean, it's hard for me to dispute it because I wasn't there, but I think that it reduces a little bit like the personality or like who the person was. You know what I mean? I like also to look people as human beings. I think that it's a good story. It's kind of believable, but I think it's something that reduces like the energy, the spirit of Malcolm. But I had a question for Zach though. I had a question, like you let me know like if it's a good question or not, because that's another feeling I have. Like, how you from New Jersey, right?
Yeah.
How did you feel about the documentary kind of putting that stigma on people? I felt that's my feeling, right? The documentary on Netflix.
Mm-hmm.
They were saying that New Jersey as a community was kind of guilty of protecting Malcolm X killers. Is that like is it something that you?
Well, so from the documentary, I mean,
Yeah.
they actually show you how a lot of these people who felt that way about Malcolm X, you know, are still around. You know, so the thing is, I think what often goes overlooked, and this is why I said it's important for us to look at history and write our own history. Otherwise, other people will write it for us. Is that, you know, what are the reasons why those people did not like Malcolm X? You know, and the thing is, they didn't like him because he was going to clean house. The thing is, he saw the infrastructure of the Nation of Islam as a vehicle for a project that they did not want to be a part of. So it was going to get in the way of whatever their projects were. And for me, what it showed is how these kinds of secrets can be open. Like, it's like an open secret, like, about who the guy who shot Malcolm X was. And, you know, Cory Booker knew who he was. Ras Baraka knew who the shooter was. He had a community center out there for like 30 years and nobody said nothing. And the guy in the documentary actually said it. He was like, well, don't mess with him because the government's protecting him. And, you know, it's almost like the Frederick Douglass thing where, you know, people think that white people are omnipotent. You know, they think they're always around, they're always watching. So, you know, like, that's why people like that, oftentimes, who do what they do to our people, you know, we're more scared of our oppressors than because that's what I mean. It's like when you see certain personalities who are fighting against a white system or white people, they're not scared of white people. So they deal with the people amongst their ranks the way they deal with them. Like, but you know, we kind of think about things in a fixed way where we only think about things in the context of one country. But when you look at these things, like, in many different contexts, like in different wars, different countries throughout history, you see how people deal with their traitors. You see how people have dealt with them here in the United States. Like, this is part of history too. Like, you know, I just think what happens is sometimes we get caught up in cherry picking based on ideology, and we don't look at the whole narrative of what happened and situate things within its proper context. Because there are many people who know it was like, yeah, well, if the government wanted them dead, well, interest convergence, I wanted them dead too. That's what sellouts are, you know. Like, I mean, that's just, yeah.
Yeah, and I think, again, the important point is behind the Afro-Saxons, there's always a white person somehow involved, one way or another. Whether it's that white socialization or that funding, there's always one of them around, one way or another.
Yeah, if they don't get you directly, they get you by proxy.
Exactly, because, and what I liked about this is weird, because I'm coming from a certain perspective when I say I liked the film. Because you guys know how I am when I say that. When I say I like the film, because I talk about this on the AWO podcast all the time. I'm really starting to have, as I grow in my understanding, just the different ways which our people misunderstand the system that's against us. And in this film, you really see it, because what you're seeing, right now, when we talk about, Black Lives Matter, the liberal funded organization, and other things going on, you're really seeing, and what I saw with this post-Trump Biden stuff, you're really seeing, how do I say it? You're seeing Black people who are used to that socialization with whites, thinking, oh, we can all get along. And then Trump comes along and they have to face reality. And they're reacting to that reality. And I think those are the kinds of Black people that really enjoy this film on a non-analytical level, if you get what I'm saying. So what I like about this film, it shows you those reactions in real time so you can see them. That's how what I say I like about this film, because it's very clear that it's integrationist perspective. So I'm never going to like the politics of the film. But this is a lot of times how our people think, that when we get into nationalism, how are you going to do it? Is it practical? Practical meaning you need white people to do everything. And two, you're just hating white people, right? It's those two things. Like, and I really enjoyed watching, because also the context of when I was watching it and who I was watching it with. I could see different Black people, really agreeing with. I could imagine a room where you see people agreeing with certain counterpoints that Malcolm was making. And then also I could see some people in the other room like, yeah, well, Sam Cooke has a point. But I want to just zero in on Sam Cooke's character in the film, just a little bit, and that dialogue with him and Malcolm when they're talking about the music industry. And what I thought was interesting, the film constantly, portrays that, Malcolm is a religious zealot who can barely be critical of this contradictory religious leader. But there's not a lot of attention given to the begging that Sam Cooke does for white acceptance. That's not something that's really highlighted. It's something that comes out of Malcolm's mouth. Obviously, they reflect that Malcolm would say something like that. He brings it up all the time. But the way that the scenes are cut, the things that are emphasized, you're not made to think about, well, why does he think that you need white people, right? Those things aren't done. And I think that filming is exactly what Black people who enjoy and think in a Blackish Kenya Barris kind of way, they would absolutely adore this film, especially Sam Cooke's perspective, because I see it with that sort of Jay-Z type of activism. I'm an entrepreneur and I help people because, I hire Black musicians. Yeah, like the three people are, oh, give me a break. Like Beyonce and Jay-Z, oh yeah, they can do, Black Panther salutes, but I bet you their staff is majority Eurasian, I'm pretty sure. Right, because they're not going to alienate their white fan base, right? And that gets into the whole, industry and institutionalization issues. But that's the thing. None of these people don't talk about institutions or control. It's always about not all white people are bad, and there's things we can do on an individualistic level. It goes back into that individualism. And I think Sam Cooke's character shows that very well. And I think in terms of these popular discussions around race and racism, especially why a show like Blackish is popular. So I just see it within that context. So it's a very Blackish politic perspective on Malcolm X, because they'll say, okay, I agree with you, Malcolm, or I agree with Black nationalists. There's racism, there's X, Y, and Z. But now you can't just be saying, I can't be fucking no white woman. I mean, sorry, excuse me, I can't be having no sex with no white woman or no white guy, especially with this swirling agenda that's out today, right? With the Shonda Rhimes propaganda machine for Black women engaging in Black rinsing relationships, right? I just see it. These are the kinds of people that like it, that they're upset about Donald Trump because it makes them feel, or they can't face the fact that assimilation isn't really possible. Not that it should be desired, but just for that thinking. I know I went on a bit of a tangent there, but that's that Sam Cooke dialogue between Sam Cooke and Malcolm X. I think it's very accurate to the ideological tension that you see amongst African people, whether it be in the United States, probably in France, you can see it. In London, England, with the Welfare Queen, you can see it. Welfare Queen's territory, you can see it. You can see it even in the continent when they debate about things like globalization, because what is globalization other than, the global reach of white terror domination or Eurasian terror domination, right? Where, after people debate, we shouldn't be anti-modern, we should be, our culture, we should blend. It's the same debate over and over. So I think it really does highlight that unfortunate reality accurately. Not that I'm saying it's a good thing, but it does capture that to me. And I think that's always something, I guess, because I was a person who was I think I'm just starting to now think about those implications. And I think this political climate we're in now really highlights that, especially looking how African people respond to Donald Trump. And I would also add in there the Meghan Markle situation with her failed attempt to fully assimilate into the British welfare family.
Yeah, I mean the Sam Cooke exchange was very interesting, because I think that what the film creators did with that exchange is they wanted you to walk away with the impression that Sam's interaction with Malcolm helped to radicalize Sam Cooke's content a little bit, because he was already using that so-called Negro soul in his sound, but the content, the words, what he was singing about was not reflective of the Black experience in America. So I think that exchange that he had with Malcolm kind of helped to give his music a depth that it didn't have, right? And in the film, right, in this made up film. But on the other hand, what the exchange did, what they wanted you to walk away with was Sam Cooke, although Malcolm doesn't come to a point of agreement like in the movie, but the points that Sam Cooke is arguing is meant to show the other side, where it's like, hey, the integrationist has a point too. We got to be here, we got to do business, you know what I mean? Like all this radical stuff you talking, Malcolm, yeah, that's all fine and good, but that's not realistic for the majority of us who, we got to eat, we got to feed our families. And like you brought out the point where they said, well, Malcolm, do you even have a job? You know what I mean? Like, so I think that a lot of the exchanges that we saw were opportunities for the producers of that project to say, while we appreciate Malcolm, okay, baby, while we appreciate Malcolm, he was immature, he wasn't realistic, he wasn't very practical, but he started to break free from some of the from some of those constraints, and unfortunately, he was killed before his transformation could be met. So
You're
that
not.
way, when they do that, when they kill his character in that way, they make it look like in our generation we get to arrive at where Malcolm was going by fully embracing Americanism and integrationism and just like all of the shit that Malcolm was fighting against. So I guess that's how they did do
They, I think, as I was going through these different like books, like the final speeches of Malcolm X, Dr. John Ray Clark edited a book, Malcolm X, a man in his, man in his times. I was going through and I was reading a bunch of these essays, and the effort to make Malcolm X into a leftist or something that's palatable for liberals and moderates is something that is been ongoing the entire time. And what I saw in the film was an emphasis on his religion, but nothing that made his religion distinct from the white theology of Christianity or the Arab theology of Islam. Yeah, I think it's just you maybe. But all I was gonna say is I guess what I thought as I was watching the movie is this is how they take our champions of history and they whitewash them the way they've done, like, people in the past, like, maybe like Hannibal Barca or somebody like that, like I'm just thinking about the process of making Malcolm X not exactly who and what he was, because they never emphasize how he was a Pan-Africanist. They'll emphasize, him being a Black nationalist. They'll talk about him being maybe a leftist or a third world this. They'll talk about all of those things, but they don't talk about Pan-Africanism when they talk about Malcolm X. And I think that's key to how white people see Pan-Africanism. They like, even I remember, I'm just thinking about Dr. Sante talking about at his talk about Malcolm X a couple years ago. One of the things that he said was how Martin Delany, they call him the father of Black nationalism. They say he never called himself a Black nationalist. He called himself a transformativist. And, the term Black nationalism is a term, not even Garvey called himself that, really. He called himself an African fundamentalist. So the thing is, it's like the term Black nationalism is something that was originally insult. The same way like the white people didn't know how to market Erykah Badu, so they called it neo soul. Or they didn't, they don't, they, or funk. Like all these words come from external. They're external terms for the way African people would call themselves or name whatever their tradition or their ideology is. So, I mean, but Black nationalism, by the time the 50s, 60s roll around, it's like that's a term that people embrace. They're like, yeah, I am that. Like, that makes sense. But, it's about being unapologetic. But yeah, I just wanted to make the point. I was hoping Wale would be back, but
You had some issue, also connection issue. Go ahead, Tristan. Sorry. Yeah, hopefully be back.
No, I think that Pan-Africanism point is important because, in fact, in the film, he mentioned that he was starting an organization, but and any of us who are informed, we know it's the OAAU that he's forming, right? The Organization of Afro-American Unity. That's what that's what is in formation at the time when he kept saying the new organization. So it's alluded to in the film. But to your point, European people, when it comes to, and also some of our people, because of that indoctrination, we don't want to engage certain things systematically. So you don't really get an understanding of Black nationalism on a systemic level, or in this case, Malcolm X's perspective of Black nationalism. You just get that he knows, he doesn't trust white people. That's sort of what you get, right? Because, racism, he doesn't trust white people, understandable, yada, yada. But is this, and then Ikomawale, we've all touched on, is this practical? So I think that's very important. They don't really engage with you substantively, right? And then when you have our people who are socialized by this type of thinking, and this is where the danger comes in, because again, we're in a very highly, socially integrated context, right? Hence why you see the responses we do. Because I think about, there was something I know Brother Omawale posted. I know he's not on right now, but he posted on Twitter, and I saw a few people post it, a Black lady sketch show, right? With this Hotep propaganda. I see the film in that kind of light, where you have a hyper visibility of liberal Black people who want to be Black when white people aren't, accepting them. But then when they meet Black people who want to do things outside of white people, then you get to really see what they start to sound like, the people who have missocialized them. So I really think that lack of substantive and systemic analysis is really important, because like you said, Zach, they're not going to show you a scene with him in the room with somebody like John Henrik Clarke in juxtaposition to his dialogue, let's call it that, with the three gentlemen, right? They're not going to show you people who agree with him besides him. I think that's very tactful. Show you three people who fundamentally disagree, so you give that, that illusion of numbers, right? Rather than showing him in context with people who agree with him, even if it's for a brief moment, because that kind of thing. I think that's important.
Yeah, I mean, they never. I mean, and but this is why, like, I think, to your point earlier about Malcolm X being very poignant about where funding and who was the puppeteer. I think, he said, you don't blame the puppet, you blame the puppeteer. And, I think oftentimes it was funny because there was a scene where Muhammad Ali, he was talking to Jim Brown and Jim Brown had just gotten a role in a spaghetti Western in a movie. And basically, Muhammad Ali started laughing at him because he's like, I knew as soon as they said they made you an action hero, I knew you was going to end the sentence with you getting killed in the movie. And Jim Brown was offended by that, because the thing is, from his perspective, he's a movie star. But from Muhammad Ali's perspective, it's like you are the sacrificial Negro in their movie for them. And I thought that was kind of telling because, I think that kind of fly in buttermilk mentality, borrowing from James Baldwin, I think that mentality in juxtaposition to a Black nationalist mentality where you're constantly around your own people, organizing your own people, as to where, Jim Brown is a little more isolated, kind of like, off, in Hollywood and those other circles while he's in the NFL, like it's just interesting to see the dynamic on how those two perspectives play on each other. That's Muhammad Ali and Jim Brown. But, I think the idea is that Muhammad Ali in some ways mirrors some of the sentiments of Malcolm X, at least in that conversation,
Also,
I like the image quickly. Just 1 minute. I kind of like what you said about the scene. The scene you spoke about.
Mm-hmm.
Jim Brown was like the probably one of the most powerful men. Like, I mean, like a strong athlete in America. He was like a champ. I mean, not a champion. Like he beat the record of yard or something like that. And he gets in the movie where like he's killed, and like it's just like again, it's another way like you demonstrate, you can show that, you know, like how dangerous are movies sometimes, how they can destroy your character, how they use sometimes to kind of reduce a human being. Like, you know what I mean, like if they cannot beat you in sport or in the court, you know what I mean, or the football field, they're going to lure you into a movie and give you a bunch of money, because he said something like $30,000 that he was going to get. It was a lot in that time, just so that he can die in the movie. It was like one of the most powerful athlete. Him and Muhammad Ali were I think at that time, and getting a movie and being killed not even far off the movie. That's kind of that's another way. That was interesting. You know, like there's some element in a movie that they show that you can say, actually they point out something that's really interesting, because it's something that we have to learn when we watch movies about African people. Is like, what are they doing to them in the movies, right? What kind of role they give them, and like and how much money they're ready to give them so that they can be humiliated in a movie, or things like that. Go ahead.
Yeah, and to add to something you said about movies, it made me think of Paul Robeson, because Malcolm X looked up to Paul Robeson, and Paul Robeson was a movie star. He's a movie actor. But if you watch the documentary Here I Stand, there's also a book called Here I Stand. I don't have the author with me right now, but long story, basically in that documentary, you have Black film critics, basically people who are criticizing Paul Robeson for some of the stereotypical roles that he depicted in his movies. But the thing is, again, like you said, I think you said, if they can't beat you in whatever your domain is, then they have to find a way to demoralize you, you know, or at least to find a way to diminish your image, you know. And you know, I think Jim Brown's perspective as a movie star, in that perspective, in that situation, is kind of related to, like, you know, how like many movie actors are, you know, like they, you know, it's like that's one job of many for them, where they don't even see the image of how they're depicted, because they're in motion, you know. So you know how they say, like, what they say, hindsight is 20/20, you know. So, but I think that's why it's important for us to have some kind of historical method, as Malcolm X suggested, where he says, like, you know, of all our studies, history is most qualified to reward our research, something like that. But yeah,
I like that one. But to you guys' point, the thing I also notice about, in terms of how, because I think when I watch films, it's always important to pay attention, and we've discussed this about framing. They're very, because the thing with Eurasians and black, and you know, black people who are liberalized, they will, I think, because of the climate now, they can show that, yeah, racism is a serious problem. They can always do that. Because one of the things I thought that was interesting is the scene. I don't know how accurate this was, because, you know, I know it's a critical fabulation, a fictive kind of imaginative scenario. But I think it was interesting how they portrayed his wife's disagreement with him, like sort of showing, you know, Sam Cooke's wife isn't really all about that integration stuff, but she just seems like someone who's just, you know, upset about the racism, not that she substantively just isn't really feeling white people. Like, you're not given, you know, it's not given substantive content. They're just shown as being disgruntled. Right. And I think it's very important, that framing. So you're a black nationalist because you're angry. Right. But integrationist people are always balanced. They're always rational. They can see both sides, right?
They can see through their anger to apologize to their enemies.
Exactly. They can see the nuances. Not all white people are racist. You can't go around hating white people. This is very common. Even in, unfortunately, sometimes even in our own social circles, because I think, and I know Perrott talks a lot about the white validation syndrome, how deep it is. Right, even for some of our people, sometimes when you just say white people are the problem, you know, it can cause a around a bunch of African people, and I really see that. And when you express those type of views, but again, going back to the film because I'm getting on a tangent, that I think that scene with her, because you always see that, because a movie I have in comparison is Selma. I think this film, what Selma did and how they portrayed Malcolm X, and then also there was another figure who didn't agree with integration, I think, in Selma, or the husband, or no, it was Hidden Figures. The husband didn't agree with integration, and in Selma, Malcolm X was portrayed. It was like, it was very meek. It was very, the way Selma worked was it was very teleological. Martin Luther King is right, and everybody just doesn't have the foresight he has. Then in Hidden Figures, the husband who's critical of one of the wives in Hidden Figures, the three African women who worked for NASA, right? One of the husbands, at least as he's portraying the film, just felt like, we need to get away from these people, or anybody who has any kind of separatist inclination. They're just given, the perspective that they're simply reactionary, or they don't have substantive thought. And then this gets into, and I think some of us bring up the Marxist question, right? Where a lot of times Marxist people think when you have a race first perspective, the assumption is that it's not conceptually, or in their words, materially substantiated, when it's really just their ahistoricism, right? But that's another conversation for another time. But I think that, again, I just want to reiterate that lack of a lack of substance given to the perspective. Like, this is a dialogue. You're seeing how integrationists, their anxieties about, encountering Black nationalist people, right? It's a Blackish angle. I'm not just saying to be funny. I really think Blackish, and because I've suffered some episodes of it, and it just gave me a lot of insight. I really think that Blackish mindset is, especially when people in our generation and younger are being indoctrinated into this Blackish mindset. I can, navigate white institutions but still be Black, right?
You're an angry integrationist. That's the new theme.
Yeah.
And you can be around them and be angry at the same time, and without questioning why you need to be around them to begin with.
Because this actually brings me back.
Who are we without them? That question never occurs,
And this is my thing with Blackish, and part of why I focus, because also Kenya Barris, ironically, is making more ish films. He wants to make a brownish. He doesn't mix it gross. So I think it's very significant, right? But one of the episodes I watched where Anthony Anderson's character was arguing with another African person, because I believe they work in an advertising company. And the argument they were having was, they're fighting over who could be the go-to Black person for whatever project the agency had. And I remember I was watching, I have a younger family member who was very impressionable. And I said, notice, and, because especially the plantation I'm in, you have to be very vigilant, especially with the multicultural propaganda they send at you. I said, notice that in this entire conversation, the two of them never decide that maybe they can start their own company between the two talents that they have. That possibility never comes up. It doesn't even occur to them. It's not even suggested. And that's kind of the angle that you can see, especially when you look at, and just because I've been studying Black sitcoms, that type of thing. But yeah, you don't see that type of question of getting away from white people. It's always, how can I be Black while still getting along with white people in those institutional spaces? Because the Black-ish part doesn't really get you to get to system. It just gets you into, well, I still Black, I talk about racism, right? But it's not, okay, but how do you understand racism? Because accidentally on social media, I think I fell into I didn't really argue with the person, but when I asked, is there any documented critiques of Blackish? Because this idea that this show is so great because it talks about racism. But how does it talk about racism? It talks about it from a liberal microaggression perspective. This whole conversation, that's what I said. Black liberals only care about microaggressions. They're not actually about combating the system of racism, white supremacy. For them, it's microaggressions. That's really what Blackish talks about. It centers microaggressions, and it justifies African people being indoctrinated into doing European things, right, that we shouldn't be doing.
The amount of money corporation today spends on program just to fight microaggression is ridiculous. That's all they care about. You know what I mean? And that's actually a great point.
Well, because it's about comfort.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's comfort politics. In Malcolm X, what did he say about that? Who lives up in the attic? Who good diction? You right? Isn't that the joke? Massa Wiesek, isn't that the joke? You know, like when he's talking about like being up real close with really close proximity to them. And again, I think what I learned from Malcolm X is, you know, when you look at other places in the world, this dynamic plays out with white people the same exact way. You know, like where these plantation politics are that's literally what it is. And you know, it's like where do people stand in relationship to their plantation? That becomes the question for people's politics, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think actually, crap, I lost my thought on that. But yeah, you do see that, yeah, how they stand in relation to white people. And I think watching those four characters, Muhammad Ali, Malcolm X, Sam Cooke, and Jim Brown, you really see it very clearly. I think that part is, you know, it's not substantiated well on Malcolm's part, but they do portray that difference. But of course, it's in a way to say, well, only integrationists are rational, or Malcolm X in particular was, you know, very promising, but just a little bit too narrow-minded.
Yeah, he's too narrow because he's focused on race and religion. I mean, the religion thing, I mean, we could have a more nuanced conversation about, but his focus is race, so that's what makes him narrow. Because there's no room for there's no room for all of us. There's only room for a select few to be in the house, you know, and the ones who are in there, they don't want everyone else coming in there messing up their opportunity. You know, so I think people don't understand that's what that narrow thing actually is. So when they're talking about somebody being an essentialist or a nationalist, or they're being whatever, they're basically saying there's, you know, you're so focused on race. If we got rid of the race, we all focus on being human, we can fit right in with white people, you know.
Yeah, exactly. Because it's always that there's always that human thing. We can all come, and I think that's what I see a lot. I guess because he was giving a lot of screenplay, a lot of the pushback, majority of it. Because I think Jim Brown's character, I don't think is something that a lot of people. It depends, you know, because right away he says, "I want to keep fucking white women," right? So I think for most people in the audience, they would kind of get his sense. But I think the most ideological substance given to anybody is Sam Cooke by far. Not saying that, you know, Jim Brown deserves substance in that capacity for his beckification. I'm not saying that. But what I mean is Sam Cooke's the only one where you get to see his nuance and his perspective. Like where he can talk about, well, you know, I do this and that, you know, I have these artists that I fund, you know, I want to make music. He says the human thing. And I like that we touch on this. Sam wants to make one music for all people. That right there tells you everything, right? He wants to make one music for all people, right? But then he says, right, and this gets into that individualism and that human stuff. So you want to talk about you're just a black covered Eurasian. That's really what it really means when our people talk like that. It's really subconsciously what we're saying. Because how is there one music for all people? We don't even sound the same.
We don't even make the same kind of music.
I know. It's like, yeah, we don't make the same kind of music. Even and that's the thing about Malcolm. He picked up that nuance. And I think the film does give a showing where when he says to Sam Cooke, you have such, and I think Malcolm was insightful like that in reality, where he said, you know, you have such a power to move people, you know, through your music. Because I think some of the critiques he had of Sam Cooke were similar, at least as portrayed in the film, were similar to what he had of artists in general, but also of, you know, a Duke Ellington, because, you know, I think that's mentioned in a biographer who did for Duke Ellington, that was mentioned. So he wasn't adverse to entertainers. He just looked at them from a systemic perspective. Like if you have entertainers, because you know that quote where he says, you know, you shouldn't ask, you know, entertainers for politics. It's not that he's saying, you know, we don't need an aesthetic. He's just saying when that aesthetic is funded by Eurasians, of course they're going to be integrationists. And I remember that interview where he says that. And he also brings up, of those entertainers, most of them, you know, again, were in black rinsing affairs or relationships.
I mean, even thinking about Malcolm X's influence around that time period, comes out Sam Greenlee, the filmmaker who makes The Spook Who Sat by the Door. And one of the things that Sam Greenlee says about the Hollywood actors is he's like they're out here chasing the bling bling. They're not trying to promote certain ideas and perspectives and experiences of people where I'm from in Chicago. You know, he's saying they're concerned with entertaining white audiences, and that's why they're not interested in certain politics and certain ideas. You know, so you know that, and you know Sam Cooke, he understands that in some ways when he's basically telling Muhammad Ali in the movie. I mean, you know, in the movie he's basically like, "Oh, you sure you want to join the Nation of Islam?" It's like, well, it's like again, it's like Malcolm, Muhammad Ali's politics of that time period are fundamentally related to his association, his relationship to members of the Nation of Islam. As to where if you look at like maybe let's say like Colin Kaepernick today, right? Like which organizations is he in association with, and what are their ideologies? What are their politics? Because he's bankrolling them, he's giving them money. You see what I mean? It's not, so it's like he's giving them money, but it's like what are his politics? You know, Muhammad Ali. I think you made this point before about team sports versus Muhammad Ali being a boxer.
Yeah, I was gonna
right?
say something about that. Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead, man.
Well, yeah, because I think that's significant that's why I don't, not saying you can't critique athletes who take political stances or critique their political stances, but I think what's really important about Muhammad Ali versus say someone like a Jim Brown even, or because this applies to Colin Kaepernick as well, they play team sports, right? So especially for someone like Jim Brown, he has a white coach, white manager, right? White players, he has to play with them to win the game, right? So you can't have a certain, like LeBron James, right? You know, when he said he read Malcolm X's book, I don't think he would want to play in the NBA if he really took in that book. And I'm not saying to mock him or to cast aspersion, but I'm saying because he would see the implications right away of what he's saying, because Malcolm is very systemic, right? Right, and LeBron James, we see how he plays, is a very analytical person, so he probably couldn't handle that, right? And why I say that is he's surrounded by white people in different capacities in team sports, right? Except in case I think he has a black coach. But now when you go to someone who's a boxer like Muhammad Ali, he can be funded simply by the NOI, right? The nation, well, that's the importance of organization, but also he's in a space where he has more autonomy, being that it's an individual sport. He's a boxer unto himself. So that Italian trainer, he can drop him and get someone from the Nation of Islam to train him, right? He can hire anybody. He's his own force because it's singular. So I think that's what makes, for me, I don't like to do that comparison between Muhammad Ali and people in team sport. The way people do it, I mean, I don't mind how you said it, but you know what I mean? I think those are important elements at play.
Yeah, I mean, because when you made the comment about the team sports, I immediately thought of Dr. Welsing talking about sports and games being scrimmages for war, right? Or basically work for children, war for children. So when I think about it, like team versus team, she's Dr. Welsing uses like the chessboard, and she talks about the black side of the chessboard and the white side of the chessboard. And if you play on team sports, if half your team is white and you're part of the Nation of Islam, like how does that work? You know what I mean? Like how do you speak without being abrasive and offending your teammates? Like how does that work? I mean, would they be willing to do such a thing if those are the circles that they're navigating all the time, and that's what their livelihood is dependent upon, right? Whereas where Muhammad Ali is, relatively independent of those kinds of institutions. I mean, everybody talks about the boxing commission being corrupt. It's because where's the oversight? It's that's the thing. But talk about that later.
No, but I think that's important. But I think again, I'm always going to keep emphasizing, repeating systematic analysis over and
exactly.
over. That's important for an Ali. Not saying that because but that gives him that kind of movability, right? So it makes more sense, in my view, to more compare him to say someone like a Floyd Mayweather, right? And his, they're more comparable in that way relatively than say someone in team sports, right? For that very reason.
Yeah.
he can navigate those things. But Jim Brown, it's like, yeah, he's pretty much like the only black dude on the team. But it's not like, I think maybe the question is different if you're talking to people that play in like a Negro league, right? In that capacity, maybe hypothetically, that's a different kind of conversation, you know.
Yeah, the NOI is a black team.
Exactly. Right. This gets into the point, and this is what I mean about certain politics, because I recall, just to go to the NBA, and I'll get back into the film, with Larry Johnson. I remember when, this was years ago. I know some of our viewers, I don't know if we have younger viewers who might know this, when Donald Sterling had that issue with the Clippers. I feel like, you know, he made that comment about, I don't want black people at the games, and then, you know, the NBA kicked him out of his ownership. But one of the things that I think came out of that, I think it was that incident. Larry Johnson, a then retired basketball player, said, you know, why don't we should just make our own black league. That's what we have to do. There were not many any players at that time were really rallying around that name. But when it comes to critiquing police brutality, of course we're for that. And that's what I mean about the different ways in which African people can see, understand, or misunderstand racism. Because a lot of times when we're looking at racism, we think of, you know, am I getting along with my white neighbor, depending on who you're talking to, or my white coworker. That's usually what our understanding oftentimes, you know, because we're navigating certain institutions, that's oftentimes what our understanding of racism is and what we first think about. That's why I say a lot of the black people I saw that wanted to talk about racism during the Trump era, there were people who, you know, usually are in blackish situations.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so it looked like we got like about 10 more minutes before we're gonna wrap up. So I don't know. I mean, I had a couple things I wanted to talk about, you know, that I had prepared, and I basically covered them. So I mean, what else? What else, Tristan? Before we go,
I would just say, just a nice, let's wrap it in a bow. We'll start with Shanudi. Just give, you know, your overall, review, your synopsis of this discussion. What are things you take away from this discussion, and if it changed how you see the film or added to what you were thinking about the film?
I mean, again, for me, when I watch a movie, again, I usually try to understand what's the project, right? And I think that was a lot of the things that we discussed kind of helped to reveal a little bit what was the intention of the people behind the movies and how they try to distort the image of Malcolm X. And he reminded us, like, I mean, at least he reminded us that until we decide to do it ourselves, to put Malcolm X on the movies and finance it and studying his story, no one will do it. And when I say that, it's people who are Afrocentric, Pan-Africanist in that sense, who can do a good job doing it. But yeah, like there's so much things that have been said. Some of the last things that you said about individual sport and team sport, that was right on, man. Like it's really so real that when you play team sport, right, it's difficult to be a really an activist because like you're still receiving a paycheck. But when you play like an individual sport, like you're more in control. Like you can manage your own team, and I never understand it. But when you guys say that, I was like, wow, I never thought about it, and that's a very good perspective. There's still dimension to it, and today the sports system trying to go around it because they're always trying to control athlete and cheat them in any ways, even if it's an individual sport. But I thought that was a very good perspective, and I really liked it. But that was a very good conversation overall. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, if I was going to tie anything up, I mean, I think what I've learned, the greatest thing that I've learned. Sorry, you know, Philly on Broad Street, all these bikes. Yeah, basically one thing that I learned from Malcolm X that I think is very important is that whole thing about following following the influence, following the bread, following the money, following who's funding who's in support with who's aligned with who. And when you can kind of see that dimension, you could see that dimensional analysis. You know, some people will call it systemic analysis. I'm calling it dimensional because I want people to actually kind of, you know, take a look at the events of history instead of being so philosophical and theoretical, ideological all the time. You know, like I think that's kind of what I learned from Malcolm X is, you know, he organized so many different groups of people, not because he wasn't an ideologue and because he was with his people. He had a black family. He was part of a black organization. He traveled to African countries, black countries, to organize with other Pan-Africanists. He didn't get a check. He didn't get a check by transfer from Gaddafi. He actually turned down the spokesman money that the Arabs in Saudi Arabia wanted to give to him because he said, "You guys are not my people." Like, you know, so the thing is, it's like, so not many people would be willing to take that kind of stand because people don't always think of money being the binder between you and whoever the benefactor is. You know, like they think of money as, oh, I take this money and do what I want with it, or I can continue to do what I want with it. But no, it's like, where's your money gonna come from later? You know, and the black nationalists from or the NOI, they had answers for those questions as to where the NAACP and CORE and SNCC did not. And that's why they took the money from, you know, so many white benefactors, and that's what limited their politics many times. You know, like you're dependent on the same people who don't want you to fix the problem so you can talk about the problem. You know, I mean, that's where Du Bois ran into his issue with the NAACP and Garvey. Like, you know, so I mean, like this is a theme, and I think it became clear to me as I studied the history of Malcolm X's life, and I saw who he organized with and who were the different groups of people that he associated with. And you juxtapose that to some of the other people who have other politics, right? So yeah, so Malcolm X stands as a model and a testament to who we can be and who we are. And I think his ability to transform is why so many of us love him, you know, from what he was to what he became. So yeah, so I'll leave it at that. So
well, just from my perspective, and I really enjoyed that discussion with you guys, and of course Sister Lydia and Sister Umwale, just technical difficulties, but I enjoyed it overall. But to me, in the context of how I look at mass media propaganda, the quote from Nana Malcolm X, I think I misquoted it earlier, but one that really is resonating with me when we think about how we socialize our children. Because when I'm thinking socialization, I'm not only thinking about school and that, I'm thinking about just the whole thing, what our children watch, what we watch and consume, the whole gamut. Only a fool would let his enemy teach his children. And this film is part of that, teaching us outside of doing for self. That's how I see this film, is Black people perspective, and white people are comfortable with letting Black people who have this perspective, right, justifying their Blackish behavior, right? That's what this is ultimately. And it goes back to my point, because I think everything is educational, really. So that's why I say only a fool would let his enemy teach his children. And I think that sums up the way we were talking about this discussion and how I saw the film.
All right. So, Zach, you want to say something?
no, I was gonna say goodnight.
All right. Well, before we close, I just want to before we close, I just want to show to the audience. I want to thank the audience first for staying with us, and I hope that you enjoy the conversation. Right. Today is a very important day. It's Malcolm X's Earth Day, right? And it was very important that we had this discussion with you. Unfortunately, some of us had we don't control internet here, so that's why we have to fund, our organizations and invest in ourselves, so like we can at least have our own infrastructure, maybe 5, 10 years, 30 years from now, be in control of our own internet. But we want to make sure that we love our brothers and sisters. Unfortunately, they get connected and they were not able to finish the discussion with us. That's fine. But AI Week continues. Friday at 7 p.m. We will have, for those who usually watch our podcasts, that you can find on our YouTube channel and also on Facebook. For the people who are connected, you'll be at 7 p.m. You will be able to watch a special African World Order podcast. This is a special 10 years anniversary because Afrocentricity International is 10 years now. In August 1st. But since that's going to be our season finale, we'll be talking more about the organization, the Afrocentric philosophy. So if you're really interested in knowing who we are, and also be introduced to other division, because we're going to have the participation of other division worldwide. Some who can be up at this time. So probably the Shinuti from the division from France, in Cameroon, in Brazil, and some here in America. So the 7 this Friday at 7 p.m. Check us out. It's gonna be really interesting. We usually have like good conversation, and you can also go on YouTube and try and find like the other 15 episodes that we have. We discuss about many various topics. If you have teenagers, on Saturday the 22nd, we'll have a youth forum. So the theme of the youth forum is going to be the African resistance. What's the African resistance look like during the Black Lives Matter era? So it's gonna be like young mostly teenagers having this forum online, where like they discuss like what African resistance look like. So they're really very bright young brothers and sisters, and we have this space for them where like they will showcase. So like that's gonna be I think on Zoom. So we're gonna share with you the Zoom. So if you have a youngster, teenager who want to take part and meet other Afrocentrists and Pan-Africanists who are teenagers, that's you can definitely send us our way, and then we'll join the conversation. The same Saturday at 2 p.m. we'll have like a children's story circle. That's what we've been doing for the 3 past years since we started AI Week. On a Saturday, we're gonna tell stories, African stories, to teach morals and values and also history to younger kids. You know what I mean? So if you have like a young child at home or like a nephew, whoever, again, here on YouTube, on Facebook, they'll be able to listen to some stories, African stories, and it's very good. It's very important. You know what I mean? It's good for them to grow up knowing some stories. And on Sunday, we're going to have an all-day watch party. So we'll be watching different film documentaries from 11 a.m. to 6 p.m. So you can log on anytime. That's for families. Like you can watch it with the family, with friends. You're probably going to have the same people that you have right now, and many others who's just going to tune in. And we're going to watch films, and in between, we're going to just share perspective on the film that we watch. We did it last year. It was very good, and it was really interesting. So you don't want to miss that. And May the 25th, which I think is a Tuesday, and that's going to be during the African Liberation Day. We're going to premiere like a documentary that we produce ourselves. You know what I mean? That's about let me remove something here. This banner. Okay, yeah, it's going to be at 7 p.m. So May 25th at 7 p.m. we're going to have the premiere of like a documentary. It's called More Than a Marker, that we filmed here in Germantown on the Potter Field. That's actually in Germantown. So that's really interesting. We really excited to show you that. If you remember, if you know Sister Tyra and Wahida, they actually direct and cut all the movie. I was one of the guy who was, you know what I mean, out there also kind of helping. But this sister did an absolute great job. So I really encourage you to come and watch this premiere and participate to the discussion that they're going to have. You're going to learn a lot. So that's pretty much it. So I hope to see you all for the rest of the event, and continue to follow us on Facebook. Tristan, Zach, maybe you want to say one last thing? Anything else?
I just say Shemotep and have a good night.
Yeah, I was gonna say the same thing. Have a good one, y'all. Shem Hotep.
Shemotep. Peace all.